Welcome to the Dispatch Podcast. This is Jamie Weinstein. My guest today is Congressman Dan Crenshaw. Congressman Crenshaw is a former Navy SEAL, has wide experience on foreign policy. So we get into a lot of topics of foreign policy, including the current zeitgeist within the Republican Party on Russia, the war between Russia and Ukraine, what is going on in the Middle East with Israel and Gaza and beyond. We also talk a little bit about the state of the GOP, Donald Trump, what the foreign policy zeitgeist is within the GOP, and even surprisingly, not intentionally, a little conversation about January 6th and what a future Trump presidency might entail. So I think you're going to enjoy this conversation, and particularly the end. So stay until the end. Without further ado, I give you Congressman Dan Crenshaw. Congressman Dan Crenshaw, welcome to the Dispatch Podcast.
Hey, good to be on with you.
I want to start, Congressman, with foreign affairs. List 4 hot spots in the world. You have flashpoints in some of them, like China and Taiwan, North Korea, obviously at the DMZ, Ukraine, Russia, and several hot spots in the Middle East. Which of those conflicts, how would you rank those conflicts in terms of what concerns you, A, for the potential for a more global, international world war type of conflict, and threats to the American homeland?
They're also different. I wouldn't rank them. You know, the world is too complex to start ranking things. Everybody wants simple answers in foreign policy, black and white answers. I mean, is it going to hurt me or not? You know, and it's like, it's not that simple. None of this is that simple. Is it in our interests or is it not? You know, define your interests. Do you have an interest in maintaining your way of life and, you know, having running water and iPhones and us having conversations and podcasts, Zooms? I mean, it's quite a way of life, and it was very different than before the World War II era. So I don't think people appreciate that very much. And that's what connects all of those things, right? It's chaos. It's either chaos or stability. So all of those hot spots represent chaos. And the question Americans have wrestled with forever, pretty much, is, do we have an interest in stopping chaos? Why is it our job? And we really didn't want to stop the chaos in World War II. And eventually we just had to, because we were attacked. It was going to come to our shores eventually. And we maintained that doctrine ever since. And many on the right or the left like to deride it as the world policing. But that world policing gives you the way of life that you have now that you should be a little bit more appreciative for. So all of those just represent chaos. We could get in detail on like exactly what kind of chaos. There's different types of chaos, I suppose. Are there threats to the homeland in any of these scenarios? I'm not so sure. But, you know, adversaries like Russia and China, if they really, really want to, they could absolutely hurt the homeland. I mean, we lived through the Cold War, so we already know that. The tools are more advanced now, but they're there. You know, and so our question that we're always answering, we're trying to answer, is at what point can we stand up for ourselves and for our allies without escalating to that point? And that there's massive disagreement there, right? Even, you know, some people believe that even giving Ukrainians money and weapons is World War III. You know, they're still claiming that 2 years later, which is an odd thing to claim after that entire idea has been discredited for multiple years now. And they'll say the same thing if you want to defend Taiwan. Now, defending Taiwan can mean a lot of things too. It can mean giving them weapons. It can mean literally defending it. We're not sure. So I'll leave it there.
Let's delve into each of those a little bit, if I can. And let's start with Israel. You've experienced war. You've obviously seen it. How, from your vantage point, you're obviously not on the ground, do you judge how Israel is conducting the conflict? And do you believe the ultimate goal of eliminating Hamas is an achievable objective?
Yeah, I mean, look, we didn't entirely eliminate Al-Qaeda. We didn't entirely eliminate ISIS, but we basically did. So it's an achievable thing. You know, you never dismantle this radical ideology, and they're all the same kind of ideology in the end. But you operationally dismantle them. That is an objective possibility. So the Israelis are not crazy to think that that's a possibility. You know, do we want to armchair quarterback their tactics and how they've been doing things? I don't really want to. No, just leave it there.
There is a potential that Israel turns to the north with Hezbollah. I mean, there already have been conflict there, but to maybe a revisiting what happened in 2006 in that war. Would you support, as a congressman, if Israel felt its need to turn to the north and start another front in the conflict, or fight against or defend itself against another front in the conflict?
That's an impossible question to answer, right? You know, do you support a war that the context of which is not apparent to us yet? You know, I don't know. That's a total hypothetical. So, and there's a lot of if then statements to be made. If this, then yeah, I would say this, but if that, then I would say something different. So I'm not so sure that it's that close. And it's never as simple as starting war with Hezbollah. I mean, Hezbollah is Lebanon, but not quite. There's constant sort of fighting and skirmishes, if you will, between the two. I'm not clear on how close a real conflict is and how do we define real conflict. I have trouble believing the Israelis want to open up another front like that, to be honest. I don't think it's in their interest. I don't think they'd be itching for that, but I haven't spoken to them recently.
Let me ask you, I asked Governor Christie when he was a candidate and came on the show, there are American hostages in Gaza. You were in the special forces. Do you think there is a role for American special forces to play, given that there are American hostages in Gaza?
Yeah, it's just worth noting, though, and people should understand what kind of situation you're dealing with in Gaza. Why didn't the Israelis see this big attack coming on October 7th? Why is it so hard to find these hostages? Our American intelligence apparatus and national security apparatus seems to be able to find anyone, anywhere, and kill them with a drone strike or go rescue a hostage. Why can't we find these? And the answer is because Gaza is a very unique place. It's denied territory. It's a denied area, as we would call it, meaning we have no access to it. We have very little human intelligence there. I mean, and just I don't actually know how many sources the Israelis have. Okay, but I do know how to do human intelligence, and it's really, really hard. You have to have a source that has access and the right placement and access to the right information. And that source has to be willing to talk to you and take enormous risks in talking to you. And there has to be something that motivates that person. So that's a really difficult thing to find in a place like Gaza. Nearly impossible. So that's that. I say that to help explain to people why it wasn't so obvious that this attack was happening. And also why it's hard to find hostages, because on top of that, all the dead terrorists or all the dumb terrorists are dead. The smart ones are still around. They've been doing this for decades. They know how to avoid. They know what Israeli capabilities are. They know what our capabilities are, more or less. I mean, they have an idea, and so they go off communications completely. And they because it's a denied area, because it's their area that they control. They don't have to talk on the phone. They don't have to talk on radios. They can just go talk to each other in person. And in a dense urban environment like that, it's just very, very difficult to find hostages. Now, if we had a exact location, for sure, we were 100% on it, and it was an American hostage, and the target area looked like an achievable goal, yeah, we might go for that. But it's very hard to imagine that scenario, even if you knew exactly where they were. It's very easy to imagine a bunch of military commanders honestly looking at that and saying, there's a way higher likelihood that we all die and all the hostages die if we go in than if not. I mean, that's just the reality of a situation like this.
Let me ask you one more question about this region. Qatar, in one way, it funds a lot of our enemies, and another way, we seem to use it as a negotiating place. We came to the Taliban deal there. I don't know if you probably don't think that was a good deal. The hostage negotiations are occurring there. U.S. military base there. How should Americans view Qatar? Is it a friend or a foe?
That's exactly what it is. It plays both sides, and it openly plays both sides. For Americans who just don't understand the Middle East, this is like their first time they've looked at the Middle East. They're like, "What is this deal with Qatar?" I'm like, "That's just Qatar." And so those of us who have been doing this for a long time, it's like, yeah, they play both sides. They're a 20-minute flight from Iran. Do you think they're not playing both sides? They have to. They by matter of their own just to exist, they have to play both sides, and we take advantage of that. So we don't view them as friends or foes. We view them as partners when we need them. And frankly, that's the way to view pretty much all relationships in the Middle East, except Israelis. There's more of a moral bond between us and Israel, but that's not the case with Saudi Arabia or Qatar. Look, we're partners out of necessity, where our interests align, and so we use you. Like we need a base, and so we have a base in Qatar. It's a very important base to us. So they give us that. And we know that they talk to others. And because they talk to others that we don't like talking to, we can use Qatar as that sort of that neutral place. I don't like that they fund these things, but I think people think it's some big conspiracy when it's actually just completely out in the open. And that's Middle East politics.
Let's turn to Ukraine, Congressman. Just legislatively and logistically, do you believe there's a chance that Congress will authorize the funding for Ukraine?
Yeah, I think something gets authorized. The question is what and what's attached to it. I don't. I'm not willing to sign on to the Senate supplemental. It can be vastly improved with bipartisan support. I'm working some efforts on that. I'm rewriting it. I can give you a quick outline of what I'm thinking, but there was already some efforts done for Republicans, for Democrats got together. I haven't gotten to see the text of that. I just saw sort of a summary. Very, very moderate Republicans, very, very moderate Democrats got together and they put something out that was certainly an improvement to the Senate deal. And so that's going to be how this is played because our leadership isn't really doing it. But here's how it should look. Whether it's Ukraine aid or Israel aid, it needs to be the exquisite weaponry that only we can provide. It needs to be the weaponry they need to win the war. And now winning has a lot of definitions. We could get into that. It doesn't mean taking back every inch of territory, but it means making the Russians regret it. It doesn't need to be a bunch of humanitarian aid. And I know that bill that the moderates just came out with stripped all humanitarian aid out, which is, that's a good step number one. Step number two, you actually have to relabel it. It is not accurate to say that there's $60 billion going to Ukraine. It's just never been accurate. It's never been accurate to say there's $113 billion going to Ukraine. It's more than half of that is all spent in the United States. So it's spent on our troops. It's spent on our industries. It's meant to pay back us. So we dust off old artillery rounds that are probably expired. We give them to Ukrainians, and then we buy new ones for ourselves that are better. And it's woken up our industrial base in a way that was deeply, deeply necessary. There's a lot of benefits to this. So those are the first things there. You strip out humanitarian aid, let others pay for that. Same with Gaza. Israel doesn't need humanitarian aid. Gaza wants humanitarian aid. There's plenty of really rich Arab nations that I think should be providing that, like Qatar. So it strips that out. And then you get to the other part, though, which the Senate supplemental left out because they didn't want to do a border deal. I'm not ready to give up on a border deal. You need to have something on the border in that bill, period. That's a must-have. The bill the moderates came up with had some of that. It's really unclear to me, just based on the summaries I read, what exactly it is and how much leeway it gives the administration. I think it can go harder. I think some things to keep in mind that are really important. You just need to change out a few words in current immigration law to make that parole that vast paroling that the Biden administration is doing, to make that completely, clearly illegal. You do have to change a few words. Not that hard. Asylum laws need to be different, just upping the standard. And there's a lot of ways to increase the standard so that just not everybody just let through. All they do is claim, well, I'm scared. And okay, let's put them in the process and let them come to court 10 years later. That has to stop. There's very clear ways to do that. I like an emergency provision. That's what I'd like to see, an emergency provision that just shuts down the border. In the Langford Cinema bill, that provision was triggered by a number of encounters. Everyone misread that. Maybe, I don't think anyone read it, but everyone misread that to read entries. It was never that. But maybe just strike that entire part and just make it an actual shutdown, because we already know that the levels are too high. And so it can be a temporary shutdown. It can be 6 months, something like that. These are the kind of things, these are the kind of conversations we should be having, to actually get a handle on the border as it is right now. But there has to be one more thing: remain in Mexico policy. That was in their write up as well, and what the moderates came out with. That's basically a bill that comes out of Foreign Affairs Committee from Chairman McCall. That really just codifies remain in Mexico policy. But the thing about that, and I like that it should be in there. The thing about it is that will always rely on a foreign partner. I need some reforms that rely on our laws that we can enforce. I can't, in the end, I can't make Mexico do something. We can try, we can leverage them, we can And that what it codifies is that the administration has to at least try. But in the end, you have to have a willing partner. Now, do we have a willing partner in Mexico? Probably. But I think we need more than that.
Congressman, can I go back just to the beginning of that, where you said you're optimistic that you'll get a package that is a border bill and an aid bill through the House and Senate. So you believe that the Republicans are open to supporting a bill even in this election season, despite the narrative that they turned against the bill in the Senate because Donald Trump didn't want an immigration deal before the 2024 election? I
don't know if optimistic's the right word. I think there's a narrow path to victory. I'm not sure I was optimistic. But what we need is, we don't need all Republicans. We need half of the good Republicans that actually want border security and don't think just want it as a political issue. I ran on getting the border secure. So I have the chance to vote on something, force something through that reduces illegal immigration massively. Bet your ass I'm going to vote for that. And any Republican who doesn't has really lost their way. But we don't have that to vote on yet. So we need to create it. We need to get some buy-in for Democrats, because you're going to need Democrat support anyway. And so you got to have a much better negotiation. I think what Laker and Sinema negotiated, I think what they negotiated was far too complicated. And if you're looking at it objectively, it reached too closely to the definition of what we might call comprehensive immigration reform, which is a really dirty word in conservative politics, because it did go into a lot of immigration reform on legal immigration, things like that. And some might say it was very sensible, but in the end, it just drove people crazy. The process was too secretive. It was too open to whatever interpretation people wanted to give it. It was way too complicated. And so you need a reset. You need very simple border reforms that you can explain to people.
Would you support a bill that was only supported by a minority of the GOP caucus, that you needed Democrats to a majority of Democrats to support you on to pass?
If the state of we're reaching is that we're going to get a massive reduction in illegal immigration and beat Russia, then it's hard to be against that kind of plan. But I don't like to answer hypotheticals either, about what we would support. That it doesn't exist yet. So we'll see.
What would you say to part of the Republican Party, maybe a large part of the Republican Party, maybe a majority of the Republican Party at this point, that is unsure or opposes aid to Ukraine, why it is important for America to provide the funds, provide the military equipment, as you said, to help Ukraine in this fight against Russia?
Yeah, I've been saying this for a long time. The reason we support Ukraine aid, military aid, and their fight for their sovereignty against Russia, it's nothing special about Ukraine. It's not enough. It's not exactly a nobody either. It pulls its weight economically. There'll be some pretty dramatic effects of the entire Ukrainian economy just shut down, which it never really did. We get a lot of our iron ore from Ukraine. A lot of the world's neon comes from Ukraine. That's used to make semiconductors. 13% of agriculture for grain comes from Ukraine. Not for us, but for the developing world. And the developing world collapses, and that has a domino effect to us. But again, it goes back to what we initially talked about. It's, do you want chaos or stability? And chaos can be described as a world where bigger countries with more weapons just take other countries' stuff by force because they can. And that was basically human existence pre-World War II. That was always what happened all the time. And it might be worth just thinking about what we had pre-World War II, just as a society. Basic comforts, quality of life, all of that, versus what we have now. We've made quite a bit of progress since that time period. And, what accounts for that? Well, what accounts for it is an American-led world where the shipping lanes are protected, where if you want to do trade with another country, you can have some confidence that whatever you order from them is coming to you, and they can have some confidence that the payment system in dollars is going to work and that they'll get paid for it. That's really basic stuff, but it's also pretty new. And I don't think people realize how fragile that system actually is and how quickly it can capitulate. You just look at some of the effects that the Houthis and Iran have had on targeting cargo ships in the Arabian Gulf and Straits of Hormuz, things like that. What happens? Well, insurance rates skyrocket. The cost to ship something doubles. And so that affects you way faster than you think. So some goods might just increase a little bit. And in a place where we already have inflation, that's not a great thing. Some goods just won't be made anymore because the price point just won't fit what the demand is. And so it's the other point to make is you have to imagine counterfactuals when you're analyzing foreign policy. And the counterfactual here is, okay, so you never supported Ukraine, you never cared. Never gave them any Stingers, never gave them any Javelins, never gave them any training, nothing, no intelligence support, none of it. And Russia would have won really fast. They would have come through pretty easily. They were stopped just outside Kiev because of our weaponry that the Ukrainians used to great effect against Russian tanks. They would have come through and they wouldn't have the massive, massive losses that the Russians have had. And they have been massive. And now they'd be on the border of 4 more NATO countries. And of course, the populists in our party think, well, Russia's not going to just invade. Ukraine asked for it, right? They have some kind of strange version of history that they tell that is basically the same, ironically, as Marxist loving Oliver Stone's history of Ukraine. So they tell that story and they deserved it. And they just don't think that maybe Russia also believes that, Estonia and Latvia are, with Russian speaking populations are also theirs. And this is what Putin believes. Anybody who looks at his past comments and writing over the years, he bashes the Marxist, he bashes the Soviet Union Marxists a lot, because he views himself more as a czar and a czar that deserves and has earned the right to have this old Russian empire, which includes a lot of European countries. And then you just got yourself into a real war because those are NATO countries. And you're in a really dangerous situation because you could have miscalculations really quickly because Russia might believe that they could invade Latvia and NATO wouldn't respond. And so they might do it. And then we would respond and then we'd actually be in a war. So having somebody else do the fighting for you and all you have to do is spend 10% maybe of our annual defense spending on it is a massive strategic win for the United States. It also, the last thing here that people need to understand is everyone's watching and China's watching. And so if you think Ukrainian economy doesn't matter, you definitely can't think that about the Taiwanese economy. It definitely matters and it will definitely affect your life in a massive way. You do not want it taken over by China. And yet that's what China eventually wants to do. They believe, just like Russia believes Ukraine is theirs, that they believe Taiwan is theirs. And so they're definitely watching this and thinking, maybe this wasn't as easy as we thought it would be. And also, they're also looking at the clock and saying, well, how long does Western support really last? And can we outlast them? Which is the constant calculation that Putin is also asking. So it's just so many bigger things to think about than just, what about our, we could spend that money here. And I'm like, the conservatives say that. And I'm like, on what? Well, I don't know, like bridges and stuff. And I'm like, well, did you want me to vote for that massive infrastructure bill? No. Well, okay. What are you talking about then? We do spend the money here, guys. So it's we'll stop there, but we could go on forever. Honestly,
I want to touch actually on your last point, the point about the other countries watching what's happening in Ukraine. And you said there's different ways to define victory. Has some of that strategic victory already been achieved in the sense that Russia thought it had this wonderful army that was going to steamroll through Ukraine, and here we are 2 years later, as you mentioned, massive losses. Is China looking at that and wondering whether their army is as good as they think it is? Has that deterrent already been achieved in the sense that all these countries now maybe wonder, especially dictatorial countries that might have generals putting their money in London as opposed to the equipment they were supposed to purchase, whether their army is as capable as they think it is, and that a conflict might be more messy than they imagined, as they're seeing already in Ukraine? Yeah, no,
I would certainly argue that massive strategic victory has already been achieved, but the problem is it can be lost for multiple reasons. If we just stop supporting Ukraine, it's not as if we're just leaving a stalemate. They do need support to even maintain a stalemate, which is still in our strategic interest. We want more than a stalemate. We want a break of the stalemate. I mean, this is kind of the argument that a lot of Republicans have.
Is victory possible? I mean,
victory by our definition. So victory by American definition would mean the Russians basically want to negotiate a deal because they're now of the opinion that they really can't advance anymore because too many things have been broken. That's victory for us. Ukrainians might define victory as getting back every inch. I don't define victory that way.
Let me just raise one more thing with you. We had Tim Mack on. He's a journalist from the U.S. who is living in Kiev covering the war and doing research for that. I mean, it was somewhat stunning. I think the average age of the Ukrainian soldier now is above 40. Recruiting is not so easy. Sometimes you have to recruit at gunpoint in Ukraine. I mean, how if we already achieved somewhat of a strategic victory by making dictators around the world think twice, at this point, is there a point at which we have to go to Ukraine and say there has to be some sort of settlement because your country cannot sustain this war any longer?
Yeah, but they're not the only ones at the table. The Russians are also at that table, and so you have to get the Russians to a point where they believe that it's in their interest to actually do that. And to do that, you need to have a few more battlefield wins. And to do that, well, it's not just endless aid, right? I don't want not just endless artillery shells, because right now it's basically an artillery war. We've been pushing the administration, and they're always too little, too late. This has been a big problem with their strategy during this war because they're so scared of this boogeyman of escalation, and it was an irrational fear. It was a rational fear for like a month into the war, but after that, it was a completely irrational fear. World War III, I mean, how often does Tucker Carlson scream about World War III? I'm just, maybe one day he's going to be right that sticking up for ourselves and our allies results in a fight, but that day is not today. Maybe in 500 years, I don't know. In any case, that has caused this annoying stalemate that is, I think, making voters' patience weary, to say the least. So the weaponry we're talking about, though, is simply longer range stuff that can reach into the places we need it to reach and hit the right places, within Russian supply chains, production lines, command centers, whatever it is, that really disable their ability to really continue to fight the war and force that negotiation at the table. And then it is up to us to say, Ukrainians, you're going to do the same thing. Okay.
I want to turn in closing to a couple broader questions about the state of the GOP. And I think you alluded to one of the people I was going to mention in this broader question. We just had Tucker Carlson, who is apparently a vice presidential potential for Donald Trump in 2024 over in Russia, making videos comparing Russia favorably to the United States. We speak today, and you put out a statement on the news of Alexei Navalny's death. There was a statement by Lee Zeldin, a former colleague of you. I don't know if you saw this on Twitter, where he said, as the world reflects on the murder of Alexei Navalny at the hands of Putin, it's worth remembering that Democrats are actively doing Biden's bidding as they also try to imprison his chief political opponent, Donald Trump, and remove him from the ballot and ensure he dies in prison. So, we either have many big figures in the GOP either outright saying Russia is better than the United States or comparing the political environment in Russia to the United States. How did we get to this place? And is there a way out of this place that the Republican Party currently finds itself in?
Yeah, I mean, I'm reading Lee Zeldin's tweet. I mean, I think it's a weird tweet, but I'm not sure there's much more meaning than that. I think it's just looking for clickbait. Tucker's comments and his videos are obviously way weirder. He's always had an affinity for Russia. I wouldn't call him a Republican by any stretch. He would deride Reagan. He's on economic policies. He's often apt to agree more with Elizabeth Warren than Republicans. They use the coercive.
He is a potential vice presidential pick in 2024.
Okay, I'm just telling you what I think of him. That doesn't affect my opinion. So obviously I have a personal distaste. I have a personal distaste for Tucker Carlson.
Right, and I'm not saying that it should affect your opinion, but I'm just saying he's not so far outside of today's Republican Party. Because he is not some fringe figure I'm picking out of nowhere. He is apparently being considered as a vice presidential candidate on the Republican ticket. That's all I'm saying. I'm not trying to change your opinion. I'm just saying he does seem to be a mainstream figure here.
I don't know how serious that is. Trump is actually one of the more skilled politicians I've ever witnessed, and he's really good at making people believe things, just to keep them closer. So it would be a terrible pick. And I think Trump knows that. Anybody around him knows that. Just for the sake of winning, I would rather see Trump win than Biden win. So I would recommend not picking Tucker Carlson. I think it'd be a very bad idea. You're not going to grow your base by doing that. So just politically, I don't think it's realistic. He's fired from Fox News. He makes his Twitter videos now or whatever. And, he makes news by going to Russia. And that's a pretty big deal to go to Russia and interview Vladimir Putin. He's put a lot of work into that over the years, by basically repeating whatever propaganda Putin puts out constantly to make him like him, so that he can get an interview. Hey, good for you. I do think it was really strange to be in like Russian subways and supermarkets and be like, this is just amazing. Like, are you stupid? You can't be that stupid, right? Because you can go to North Korea and find some really beautiful places that they only take tourists and foreigners to. The subway, by the way, I read an interesting article on this, and it was kind of hilarious. Like the subway that he was so excited about. And Moscow has always been famous for its beautiful subway. But, the irony of that is, it was built in the Soviet era. Because look, communism, if they decide to all put all of their effort into one thing, they can figure it out. But even they actually couldn't figure it out. They had to bring in British engineers to build it. So they had to bring in engineers from a capitalist society to actually build that thing. And then I think they imprisoned them for a while. It was the whole story behind it. So it's just such blatant ignorance. And, I never know if those are lies or if it's just he doesn't know. I don't know. I don't care. I obviously hate the guy just because he's personally insulted me for disagreeing on policy issues. And so I have no respect for somebody like that.
But I guess on the broader point, I mean, do you disagree that that this view of Russia seems, if not a majority view right now in the zeitgeist of the Republican Party, it has many more adherents than it had, a decade ago? And is that a concern? I mean, what does that say about the state of the GOP and your efforts to reform it? I mean, you obviously want to get things done in Congress. You just laid out your border bill that you would like. You say you're not entirely optimistic that something like that will pass. You have views of foreign policy that do seem out of touch necessarily with maybe where the current Republican Party is. Is it worth it sometimes,
really.
Do you think?
No.
No.
Well, of course it's worth it. It's my Republican Party. It's not theirs. Because what we're talking about is a group of populists that have nothing to do with any kind of conservatism or Republican Party, not tethered in principles. And so there's a lot less of them than I think you might think. You're in media, and I'm in politics. But we both just see the loudest people all the time. But what you don't do and what I do is talk to normal people, because I have to do events and I have to go talk to, that's what I have to do, right? On the campaign trail or just part of my normal job is just talking to regular people who don't necessarily show up at like GOP conventions. And so, no, I'm not out of touch in a huge way. And there's a difference between being against Ukraine, and there is a weird like anti-Ukrainian like bent that does fit a larger majority. That doesn't mean it's pro-Russia. To be honest, if you really want to explain it, it's oftentimes it's in politics. We're looking for deeper reasons and like deeper movements within the party, like these well thought out ideologies that are captivating the public. No, look, Democrats wore the Ukraine flag on their lapel pin and like wove it around a lot, and so Republicans hated it. Okay, I mean, I'm not so sure that it's a lot more complicated than that. I can't. How many times can we count that during Trump's presidency, he was so skilled at making the Democrats believe something they didn't believe 5 minutes ago, just because now he believed it. It was astonishing. And everybody's guilty of that to some extent, I think, because he was very supportive of Ukraine when he was president. And to his credit, he hasn't really wavered a whole lot on that. He says things like, well, we should have a loan and something like that. And he's always giving space there.
When you say he was supportive of it, a lot of that support at least from reports, were people within the administration, and sometimes he'd get angry when he would learn that the administration did something. Do you believe he is personally supportive of Ukraine and not supportive of Russia?
I mean, I don't know I can't read his mind, but I can look at his actions, and his actions were definitively more supportive than the Obama administration was, despite aid given to Ukraine as far as weapons versus blankets. Remember that whole argument. The reporting that he's never denied that he said, like, if you ever invade Ukraine, we'll bomb the shit out of Moscow. I mean, that's deterrence. Sometimes a little bit of crazy talk is deterrence. When we say peace through strength, you've got to do the strength part, and sometimes strength is just talking tough. And Trump had his own version of that, of course, but it seems to have worked. So you make somebody's a little unpredictable. He had shown willingness to massively increase our troop presence and warfighting capabilities against ISIS. So he wasn't this dove. What's weird about the current, America First movement is like they're just against all foreign policy. Like if they had their way, there would be no troops abroad. Very strange idea of what national security is, but that was never Trump's doctrine at all. So, I liked his doctrine for the most part.
Can I press you on that? I mean, rhetorically, it was in part his doctrine: remove NATO troops, remove bases from around the world. That's certainly, I don't think, Dan Crenshaw's position.
Right, but he didn't do it. I mean, again, like we can try and read his mind and look at rhetoric, but actions simply speak louder. And so
let's close on this question, Congressman. It sounded like you answered my final question earlier, that in a choice between Biden and Trump, you would support Trump. And just from this back and forth, I guess your view is you're not concerned that, like some people that were in his administration, that John Bolton's, that he will do some of the things that he says he will do. For instance, Bolton's afraid that he'll actually withdraw from NATO. That was his inclination. He wanted to do that. And some other of the foreign policy positions that you're advocating against, what kind of this neo-isolationism. Why are you so confident that that is not how he will govern in a second 4 years, when he might have fewer of the people around him preventing him from doing maybe what a lot of people think is his instinctual desire?
I can't be super optimistic. I'm just more optimistic about him than Biden. And there's a lot more to running the administration also than just their foreign policy. And again, like I'm just looking at his actions. He didn't do it before. I'm not sure why he would about face so much. He hasn't even, again, like if you just look at Ukraine as a specific example, despite the massive swings in public opinion on the Republican Party that they've indicated, he hasn't done that as like nearly as much. He hasn't followed that nearly as much. And even recently, effectively said, yeah, we should give them Ukraine aid, but it should be a loan, So, okay, a loan bit with no interest rates and no time limits, which is actually a great idea and something that we're looking at writing. So it's, I don't look, the doomsdayers about Trump, I don't think they were right in the beginning. I was very upset about what happened on January 6th, but
I know, but doesn't that make them right? Doesn't trying to stay in power kind of make them right? I mean, even some of the doomsayers didn't predict that. And the fact that he tried to maintain power, doesn't that kind of justify their doomsaying?
Kind of. I mean, didn't try. Not sure how hard he tried. He tried with a lot of words and mean things. And that, in the end, we could go into this forever, I guess. But in the end, it was a peaceful transfer of power. And that was it, it was, I mean, like I was there and I was pissed about it. I was, pissed about how that mob got whipped up. But in the end, I don't call it an insurrection. It's just by definition, that's not what it is. It was an angry mob that got really out of control. And like they were lied to. They were lied to in the sense that they were told that they could affect change. And when people think that they can affect change, well, they'll get really passionate about it. They'll go and they thought that day was the day to affect change because they thought that process you were engaging in Congress could actually change the presidential election. Of course, it can't. Constitutionally, it can't. It's a bogus procedure to begin with. I hate it. I think it should be abolished. It's deeply against the Constitution. Democrats did it. They've been doing it for years. There were multiple elections. And the Republicans really did it. So it's just that that whole situation, I think, deserves a lot more explanation than just, he tried to stay in power. I mean, look, he had multiple court challenges. That he used procedures to stay in power. That's a very different thing than trying to raise an army to stay in power. It's a very, very different thing.
And fair, not at the end. I mean, I don't think January 6th with procedures. I mean, he filed court cases that he lost. And then when those failed, I mean, he failed, but he attempted to, it wasn't procedural, I don't think. In the end, I think you'll agree on that, Congressman.
Well, no, I don't, because it's, what did he do? He tweeted at Mike Pence. Did it instigate? Did it kind of make all these people crazy and make them do crazy shit? Yeah. But in the end, he tweeted at Mike Pence. Now, I think that's wrong.
And he stayed inside and didn't call for help. It didn't initiate help to Mike Pence and do all sorts of things.
Yeah, no, but you can criticize the morality of it all day long, but you can't call it this sort of South American style coup either. It's just, and I think that conversation goes off the rails way too often. Somebody's like, I try to be objective about criticisms on the right and the left. And, I think that's why I've never used the word insurrection, because it just doesn't fit. And I would say, if he was trying to stay in power, I don't think he tried that hard. Tried harder than most, but in the end, he tried through procedures, through his bully pulpit, through his ability to speak. But it ended there.
Well, Congressman, I think I would just add that I think perhaps it didn't work because maybe there was enough institutions and people around him that wouldn't follow through on what he hoped. But I didn't mean to get into a January 6th conversation.
Yeah, but let's imagine though. Let's imagine Mike Pence does do what he wants. I mean, I always kind of laugh at that because I got to ask. Stefanik said she would have done something different. I'm like, you literally can't. And that was Mike Pence's whole argument. There is no procedure for you to follow. It doesn't exist. It's not constitutional. It would be laughed out of the room right away. And so you are right about that one thing. I mean, our institutions are strong. Our Constitution is very strong. That's why we have the oldest one, even though we're one of the youngest countries. So I think there's a bit more optimism. I'm just no matter who's in power, I'm never really a doomsayer. And because you just got to take a step back. And still recognize still the greatest place in the world, despite a bunch of idiots trying to screw it up for the last 250 years. And so, there's some remarkably stable aspects of the United States.
With that, Congressman, thank you for joining the Dispatch podcast.
Sure. Happy to be on.